Okay, Ling 201, we're going to talk about semantics today, which is the study of meaning in language. And I want to say that before you get into it, I would like you to do this quick write number 24. There's a series of sentences in here, and I want you to let me know which of the following sentences are true. Could some of the sentences not possibly be true under any circumstances? Could some of the sentences not possibly be false? And how do you know whether or not these sentences are true? So take a few minutes to think about that before we go through the actual lecture. To do that now, maybe pause the lecture, but I'm going to just continue because I don't want to waste space or time, which, according to some people, are the same thing. Okay, so we want to study meaning. How do we get at it? So there are several different ways to study meaning. We've seen one already. That's pragmatics, which is an investigation of the meaningful use of linguistic expressions in conversation and discourse. Basically, how do you get meaning out of the context in which a sentence is uttered. Gone over that at some length, so I'm not going to go over it anymore. But today, what we're going to talk about primarily is what we call compositional semantics, which is how the meaning of phrases and sentences is built up from the meanings of individual words. So that leaves at the very end lexical semantics, which is the study of the meaning of individual words and how they're related to one another. So just to kind of set the tone a little bit, we could think about this. So the next question I'm going to ask is, what is meaning? And so you could think about it like, well, what is the meaning of the word kitchen, right? So I'm sitting here in a kitchen. Well, a kitchen, you can come up with some definition, right? You could probably look it up in the dictionary or what have you. It's like, it's a room in your house where you prepare food, basically. That's the meaning of a word. That's lexical semantics. Compositional semantics, we could go at that statement I just made, like, I'm sitting in my kitchen. What is the meaning of that? I can't look that up in a dictionary, right? How do I know what that means? And even if I'm thinking about the meaning of the word kitchen, what do I do when I try to figure out what the meaning is? What am I trying to figure out there? And then when I'm talking about something larger than that, like I'm sitting in my kitchen, maybe you're sitting in your kitchen too. How do I figure out whether that's true, whether that's a meaningful thing to say? So this is compositional semantics. So normally I put this question out there and say, what is meaning? And wait for a few minutes for people to not answer before it becomes clear that nobody's going to say anything, because this is a really hard question to figure out the answer to. It's not as easy to figure out the meaning of meaning as it is to figure out the meaning of the word kitchen, for instance. So we're going to be entering kind of the complicated and amorphous, hazy kind of sub-branch of the field, but it's an opportunity to have a little bit of fun with it and also get a little bit philosophical. So for today, we're going to try to figure out what meaning means for a small, kind of simple set of language data and then work from there. And we're going to be doing compositional semantics, as I said, and we're also going to focus on the literal meaning of linguistic expressions for now. So this is kind of an important point, because often when I give this lecture, I get questions about, idiomatic expressions or, things that aren't true as they're expressed on the surface. So we're just going to make it kind of as simple as possible, start from there, and hopefully build outward as we go. Okay, where we're going to start is with the concept of possible worlds. So you can consider this idea that we live in one of many possible different worlds. Things happen to be one way in this world, but they could be another way. And it's pretty easy to imagine things being different, right? So there are certain true statements we can make about the world in which we currently live at the moment. For instance, I could say, if you jump up, you come back down. Usually true. The sun is about 93 million miles away. Sorry, I haven't converted that into kilometers. It's probably something like 145 million kilometers away or something like that. Mars is a planet. It's chilly outside. That's true, although it's finally getting warmer. I'm teaching Linguistics 201, yes, but in an unusual way this time. Hobbits do not exist. All these things are true about this particular world in which we live. But this doesn't have to be this way, right? So in other possible worlds, which are easy to imagine, different statements might be true. So for instance, I could say, if you jump up, you fly off the surface of the Earth. Maybe in some other world, that's the way it works. The sun has become a black hole. That would be an exciting world to live in. We all live on Mars, also possibly exciting, also probably cold. The weather in Calgary is always nice. Yep. A hobbit named Frodo stole my wedding ring. that would be a fun one to live into. So like if you think about these as fantasies or just different possibilities, whatever, the world doesn't have to be particular this way, and we can imagine many different worlds, many different possibilities. And so basically, before I've gotten a question about this as well, like what do you mean? What defines a possible world? What's the limit on it? It's basically anything you could imagine to be different. So it leads me to another question. After not totally answering the question of what is meaning, I'm going to ask you what is truth. So how do we know that some of these statements are true while others are not? And another way to kind of ask that is, what does it mean for something to be true? So if I say, I'm sitting in my kitchen, how do you know that that is true? Or if I say, a hobbit named Frodo stole my wedding ring, how do you know that that is true or not true? I'm not going to answer that immediately. I do want you to think about it for a minute. But I'm going to consider an answer to the question that's philosophical in nature, and we're going to actually boil it down to something linguistic to say what sort of things can be true. And the way we're going to think about this is in syntactic terms, kind of based on the terms we just learned in the pragmatics lecture. So if you think about it, like a noun can't be true. Like we talk about the meaning of the word kitchen. The kitchen is a noun. It's an entity. It's all around me at the moment. So it's something specific that we can think about the meaning of, and it happens to be a noun as well. But I also said, well, sentences like I'm sitting in my kitchen or hobbits do not exist. These things have meaning as well, but they're not the same meaning that we have like for a dictionary meaning of things. Those statements like hobbits do not exist or I'm sitting in my kitchen, those can be true or false. But if you just use the word kitchen, a noun like that, it can't be true or false. You can figure out the meaning of it, but it doesn't have those sort of truth values that we think we can apply to propositions like a hobbit named Frodo stole my wedding ring or something like that, right? So what's actually something that could possibly be true is a declarative sentence. So hobbits do not exist. That's another example. I'm talking about declarative sentences here, so these sentences that have subjects and verbs, as opposed to interrogative or imperative sentences. Interrogatives are asking questions about whether or not things are true, and imperatives are just giving you orders or commands, right? So we're going to focus on sentences that have these structures, or this particular structure. So declarative sentences are also known as propositions. That word kind of popped out there a second ago. I'm going to stick with it. So a proposition is something like I am sitting in my kitchen. And we'll assume that a proposition is true if the information it imparts about the world is actually the way the world is. And you can look about me here at the moment and see, well, yeah, this is actually true. This is my kitchen. I am sitting here. When I say I'm sitting in my kitchen, that proposition is true. There's some other possible world in which that is not true, which, say, the normal way I teach 201, I would not be sitting in my kitchen when I teach 201, right? So if I said that in the middle of class, you know that it was false. That would not be the way the world actually is. So philosophically, people talk about this truth in terms of the correspondence of propositions to facts. So there are these linguistic things like these syntactically defined sentences, declarative sentences, and they can kind of exist in linguistic world, and then we have a factual world, like an objectively factual world over here, and hopefully, well, not necessarily hopefully, but sometimes the propositions, the declarative sentences describe the factual world accurately, or veridically, if you want to use that term, and they correspond to one another. So truth in that sense is when you get a match between the two. But these linguistic-y, syntactic-y things don't have to actually do that. Sometimes they can be false, right? Or not apply to the situation as we can see it in the real world. When you have truth being the correspondence of propositions to facts, that's called the correspondence theory of truth. There are other theories of truth out there. I think this is the most kind of straightforward one to sort of conceptualize, so we're going to stick with it and not kind of get into the dirty details of all the others. So we can stop for a moment here and think, well, what kind of information can a proposition provide about the world? And again, I'm going to kind of try to boil this down to something really simple. But if I say, like, I'm sitting in my kitchen or hobbits do not exist, what information am I getting across? Okay, so the way we're going to break this down is to kind of look at how these declarative sentences work. So as I mentioned before, declarative sentences have subjects followed by verbs, or you can think of that in terms of noun phrases and verb phrases. We're going to call the noun phrase the subject, and we're going to call the verb phrase part of a declarative sentence the predicate. So you can think of these as like the meaning of these syntactic entities. The noun phrase picks out a subject of some sort, and the verb phrase is a predicate. If you go to those videos on the Ling 201 homepage, the Schoolhouse Rock videos, most of those are about individual lexical categories like adjectives and pronouns and so on and so forth. There is one about subjects and predicates at the very end, which is more a semantic interpretation of what's going on rather than syntactic. So when we talk about subjects, they're noun phrases, and you probably learned this definition of nouns when you were in English class back in the day, but subjects refer to persons, places, or things. And a predicate is something that roughly describes the relationships between the persons, places, or things. And you can maybe think about subjects as being what's in the world, whatever possible world you live in, and predicates are simply the way the world is. Kind of the collection of relationships that we get amongst all these various entities. Okay, so I'm going to, again, try to boil this down to simplest terms. And this is me and my fantastic art skills again. So let's say that this rectangle is the world. This is a very boring possible world, but why not go with it? It has a number of things in the world. I guess these are 11 different things, like Mars, Earth, Jupiter, Saturn, so on and so forth. Those are different things in the world, and some of them are planets. So this particular collection of items are planets. They're combined together in a set, and we can refer to that property that they're planets as a predicate. So when I say something is a planet, this is the whole predicate I'm referring to, and these individual things happen to be planets in this particular world, these particular nouns. And again, this is just one possible world. You can kind of switch it over here to say there's another possible world in which this other entity, Nibiru, happens to be a planet too. So these are two different possible worlds. And so hopefully this isn't too arcane of a joke. It probably is. But in case you don't know, there are these conspiracy theories out there on the internet which hold that there is out in the deep reaches of space, beyond Pluto or wherever, some phantom planet called Nibiru, which may crash into the Earth someday. There is not actually such a thing, but it's possible there could be such a thing. We just don't know about it yet. So that's this possible world. This one corresponds a little bit better to the one we know, but there's other things in here like the moon and the Death Star. I don't think there's actually a Death Star in this world. But in this possible world that I'm describing here, the Death Star is a space station. So this is a smaller predicate because it only describes one object in this world, but that's how that works. You can just think of these things in terms of the sets that they apply to. Okay, so I'll pause here for a second and talk a little bit about reference. So we have expressions like Jupiter, or the Earth, Saturn, Nibiru, whatever. Let's focus on the real things for now. But we have these expressions that refer to things, but are not actually the things themselves. So like before I was talking about, we have declarative sentences in one kind of half of reality, and then we have the actual factual world that it might those expressions might correspond to. When we talk about reference, we have expressions like Jupiter, and then we have the actual planet out there in space floating around, which is the actual planet. So we use these expressions like Jupiter to refer to those actual things. We could talk about the biggest planet in the solar system. That would also refer to Jupiter, but it would not. That expression would not be the thing Jupiter, the planet itself. I'll give you another example, like Barack Obama, and I've got a picture here to kind of show you what the referent of this expression looks like. Again, the picture is not the referent. The actual dude out in the world is the referent of this particular expression. Or I could say something like the 44th president of the United States, so on and so forth. And this is actually a bit of an old picture. I should probably update it. I think he's aged a bit since it was taken. For instance, and this also works across languages, right? So there's a painting in the Louvre over in Paris that was made by Da Vinci, however many hundred of years ago, and we call it the Mona Lisa. In French, it's called La Joconde. I believe in Italian, it's called La Gioconda, so on and so forth. These are all different referring expressions, and there's one thing in the real world that they refer to, and I hope you get the chance to see it someday. So this is just kind of a reminder that languages can be arbitrary, so there's kind of no clear connection, that between the referring expression you use and the actual referent in the world. Or there doesn't have to be a clear connection between the two. So we can use a variety of different expressions to get at one particular thing. So I'm actually, I think, going to pause here because my computer is overheating, and I'm going to just kind of break this video up in two. So see you in a second.